I was kneeling in the damp earth, trimming back the hydrangeas, when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. I looked up to see Callum's silver SUV glide in, sunlight bouncing off the spotless hood. He stepped out in a navy blazer, all polished charm, the kind he wore when selling investors on a risky deal. "Mom," he called, striding toward me with that easy smile that had won him clients for decades. Got a few minutes, I wiped my gloves on my jeans and rose slowly, brushing soil from my hands. "You're here early," I said. The morning was still cool, dew clinging to the grass, and it wasn't like him to visit on a weekday without warning. "I wanted to talk in person," he said, glancing back at the car. Through the tinted glass, I could make out Diana in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, phone in hand. She didn't wave. Callum launched into it before we even reached the porch. "I've been thinking about your safety. The stairs, the big yard. It's a lot to manage. You deserve a place with people around. Activities, medical care right there if you need it. Peace of mind for all of us." It was a sales pitch, every word practiced. I could almost hear the bullet points in his head. Safety, community, convenience. "I manage fine," I said, but my voice was mild, non-committal. "I know you do, but we found somewhere really nice. Brookhaven Care Center. Beautiful grounds, great staff. Diana and I toured it last week." He hesitated, then added, "We've already placed a deposit to hold your spot." The words hung in the air like frost. I studied his face, the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth, the way he didn't quite meet my eyes. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. Already made. I smiled faintly. The one I'd used all my life when I wanted someone to think I was harmless? "Well, that's thoughtful of you." Relief softened his shoulders. "You'll love it, Mom." "Really?" I turned back toward the garden, gathering my tools with slow, deliberate movements. "If you've gone to all that trouble," I said lightly, "I suppose I should see it." He took that as agreement, not knowing it was something else entirely. 2 weeks later, the hydrangeas would bloom without me. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I couldn't slow down. Callum hired a team to help sort through my things, but they moved like they were clearing out a storage unit, not a home. Every room became a staging area. Keep, donate, discard. Decisions that should have been mine were made over my shoulder with brisk efficiency. "That dining table's too big for your new place," one man said, patting the oak like it was already his. The table my husband built with his own hands. The quilt my mother had stitched before I was born was deemed fragile and packed away for storage I'd never been given an address for. The piano, the tall bookshelves, even the old cedar chest in my bedroom, all too large, all left behind. Callum was always on a call or running numbers, but when he was present, he pushed for speed. The market's hot. "Mom, we need to list the house immediately to get top dollar." It was never about what I wanted to keep. It was about how quickly the property could be converted into cash. I signed where he told me to sign, my pen scratching through the lines like I was a witness instead of the owner. By the end of the second week, the rooms echoed. My life had been distilled down to 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. 46 years of birthdays, arguments, reconciliations, and ordinary mornings, all reduced to what could fit in the back of Callum's SUV. The morning we left, I stood in the doorway one last time. The hydrangeas outside were in full bloom, their heavy heads brushing the windows. I thought of how I'd planted them the spring after my husband died. A promise to myself that beauty could return. From the passenger seat, I watched the house grow smaller in the side mirror until it disappeared entirely. I kept my face turned toward the window so Callum wouldn't see me swallow back the heat rising in my throat. Brookhaven's gates were already in view. The first thing that hit me when we stepped through Brookhaven's doors was the smell bleach layered over boiled vegetables. A sharp cleanliness fighting a tired, lingering heaviness. The air felt still, as if it hadn't been opened to fresh wind in years. Residents lined the hallway in wheelchairs, some dozing, others staring into the middle distance. A television mounted high on the wall played a game show to no one in particular. No one looked up when I passed. Callum stayed just long enough to hand me over to a brisk woman at the reception desk. "Mom's all yours," he said, checking his watch. "I'll call later." Then he was gone. His footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet before I could even decide if I wanted to say goodbye. The woman led me to my room, a small, square space with beige walls and a window overlooking the parking lot. 2 twin beds, though one sat empty. My suitcases looked absurdly out of place, bright intrusions in a room that seemed to have given up expecting new arrivals. Later that afternoon, a woman in navy scrubs tapped on my door. "Mrs. Vaughn. I'm Nina Morales, head nurse here." Her voice was kind but tired, her eyes carrying the weight of too many shifts without rest. As she showed me around, she spoke quietly, as if careful not to let the walls overhear. "We're short-staffed most days. Budget's tight. We do what we can, but..." Her shrug said the rest. We passed the lounge, where 3 residents played cards in silence. In the far corner, a man in a worn flannel shirt sat by the window, watching the driveway. "He's been here 5 months," Nina murmured. "His son promised to visit every Sunday. Hasn't been back since the day he dropped him off." I nodded, but my chest felt heavier with each step. Back in my room, I unpacked slowly, placing a single framed photo of my sister on the nightstand. As I sat on the bed, the faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. That first week, I kept mostly to my room. I told the staff it was because I was still settling in, but the truth was I didn't want anyone to see how raw I felt. At night, when the halls went quiet, I pulled my sister's will from the bottom of my suitcase and read it again. The envelope still smelled faintly of her perfume inside. Her familiar looping script left no room for misunderstanding. To my sister, Maricela, "I leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $6,800,000, to be used as she sees fit." Tucked in with the legal language was a handwritten note she'd slipped in before the lawyers touched it. "Don't let them treat you like furniture they can move when it's convenient. You're not an object, you're a person. And you deserve to decide where you belong." I could almost hear her voice, half amusement, half steel. Catherine had never been one to tolerate being pushed around, and she'd never forgiven Callum for managing my life the way he did. The next morning, I asked Nina if Brookhaven had a computer I could use. She led me to the small activities room, where an ancient desktop sat on a desk under a stack of jigsaw puzzles. The keys stuck, the screen flickered, but it worked well enough. It didn't take long to find Brookhaven's corporate parent, Lakeshore Living Group, a privately held chain of 3 facilities scattered across the state. The most recent news articles painted a grim picture: overextended debt from a failed expansion, lawsuits from unpaid vendors, declining occupancy rates. The more I read, the more a thought settled in my mind like a seed finding soil. They were bleeding money, desperate to stay afloat. I had resources they didn't know existed. By the time I shut down the computer, I was no longer just a resident here. I was something else entirely. A woman with options. The idea stayed with me through the night, sharpening each time I heard a distant call bell go unanswered. 2 days later, I told the receptionist I had a doctor's appointment in town. She didn't ask questions why would she residents came and went for appointments all the time. What she didn't know was that I'd arranged a meeting with a law firm in the city, one I'd found through a quiet online search. Bradley and Keene was nothing like the cramped offices I'd used for my will years ago. Their lobby was all glass and polished wood. The kind of place where every detail signaled power. A junior associate ushered me into a private conference room, and minutes later, a man in his early 50s with a precise smile introduced himself as Stephen Bradley. "I'd like to set up a trust," I began. "One that can purchase a business without revealing my name." His eyebrows lifted, but he didn't comment. "We can certainly structure that for you. May I ask the nature of the business? A long-term care facility?" I said, keeping my tone casual. "Brook Haven Care Center." He made a note, then asked, "And your goal in acquiring it to make it better?" I said simply, "And to make sure certain people have to live with the consequences of their choices." He didn't press over the next hour. We discussed corporate structures, anonymity protections, and the kind of offer that would be hard for a struggling company to refuse. By the time I left, the wheels were in motion. Back at Brookhaven, Nina stopped by my room that evening with my medications. In passing, she mentioned 2 aides had quit that week and that the administrator was scrambling to cover shifts. "They keep cutting corners," she said, shaking her head. "Good staff can't afford to stay." Her frustration was real, and I filed away every detail she gave me. The chain's problems ran deeper than the news articles suggested, and that meant leverage. Within 10 days, Stephen called to say Lakeshore Living Group was very interested in a cash offer. 3 facilities, 1 purchase price, and they'd walk away from their mounting debts. I didn't need to think twice. I authorized the transfer through the trust, my name hidden behind layers of paperwork. Callum had no idea the balance of power had shifted. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I imagined the moment he'd find out, and I decided he wouldn't hear it from me, not yet. The ownership papers were barely dry when I called a meeting with Brookhaven's administrator. I outlined my first change as though it were just another operational adjustment. Families who visited less than twice a week would have their access restricted to Sunday afternoons between 2 and 4. "It'll encourage regular contact," I said, my tone calm. "And for those who can't make the effort, it limits disruption for residents who rely on a routine." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Within 2 days, the letters were printed, signed, and mailed. I asked to review the mailing list myself, making sure Callum's name and address were correct. The reaction came faster than I expected. Late Thursday morning, my door flew open without a knock. Callum stood there, letter in hand, eyes blazing. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the page like a piece of damning evidence. I looked up from the crossword I'd been pretending to work on. "Hello to you. 2. Don't play games. Mom. Restricted visiting hours." This is ridiculous. The administration can't just decide to punish families for not showing up on their schedule. I tilted my head as if trying to follow his logic. Punish? That seems like a strong word. I imagine they're just trying to make sure residents have consistent contact. His jaw tightened. "This is about me. You think I don't see that? Why would it be about you?" I asked. Folding the newspaper. "Do you visit less than twice a week?" He faltered, caught between his outrage and the truth. "That's not the point." I kept my voice mild. "Then perhaps you shouldn't take it personally." He left in a huff, muttering something about talking to the administrator. I knew he would, and I knew exactly what she'd say, because I'd written her talking points myself. When the door clicked shut behind him, I returned to my crossword, the faintest smile tugging at my mouth. The letters had done their work. Now it was time to see who else would come storming in. It didn't take long for Diana to insert herself, a week after Callum's outburst. I heard from Nina that he'd been in twice, both times with his wife, both times insisting on discussing the legality of the new visiting policy. By the third visit, they'd brought a lawyer. The administrator scheduled a formal meeting in the small conference room near reception. I sat in my own room, pretending to read, but Nina slipped in quietly and whispered, "You might want to stay out of sight. They're agitated. I should have listened." Instead, I found myself walking past the open door on my way to the lounge. The lawyer was mid-sentence, his voice carrying, "And we will need to review all administrative memos related to this policy." Through the crack, I saw the administrator slide a folder across the table. On top was a memo with the trust's name in the header. I recognized the page instantly. I'd drafted it myself, signing with the stylized initials I'd used for years in my personal affairs. Callum's eyes flicked down at the page, his brow furrowed. For a moment, his hand hovered above it, and I saw the gears turning, something about the curves of those initials tugging at his memory. Before he could pick it up, Nina breezed in carrying a tray of coffee cups. "Sorry for the interruption. Everyone thought you could use something warm." She set the tray down directly over the memo, forcing Callum to pull back his hand. The administrator moved the papers under her arm. Out of sight. As the lawyer reached for the coffee, I kept walking, my pulse loud in my ears. Back in my room, I closed the door and leaned against it. One careless document, one too familiar signature, and the game could have been over before I was ready. That night, I went over every piece of paper that might link me to Brookhaven, locking them away in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. I'd bought myself more time, but not much. Callum's next meeting with administration was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Nina had made sure I knew the time. I arrived 10 minutes early, walking straight into the conference room before anyone else. I took the chair at the head of the table, folding my hands on the polished surface as if I'd always belonged there. When Callum walked in with the administrator, his stride slowed. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for the meeting," I said evenly. "This is with the administration, yes," I replied, reaching into my leather folder. "And I am the administration." The administrator sat down quietly, her eyes on the table as I slid a crisp document into the center. The title was clear in bold print: Deed of Sale, Brookhaven Care Center. Callum's gaze dropped to it, scanning the lines until he reached the signature at the bottom. My signature. He froze, color draining from his face. "You bought this place." His voice was low, almost disbelieving. "I did," I said, "through a trust, a month ago, along with the other 2 facilities in the chain." He stared at me, then at the administrator. "And you implemented this ridiculous visiting policy." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "It's not ridiculous, it's a consequence. When families visit less than twice a week, they show their priorities. The policy simply adjusts access to reflect that reality." His jaw tightened. "You targeted me." "I targeted no one." I said, "The rules apply to every family here. If you feel personally affected, perhaps you should ask yourself why." The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead light. Finally, he pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the floor. Unbelievable. Without another word, he strode out, the door slamming behind him. I sat still, my fingers resting on the deed. The administrator glanced at me, a flicker of something like admiration in her eyes. The mask was gone now. There would be no going back, and I had no intention of putting it on again. After the reveal, the hallways stayed quieter, not from the residents, but from the families who once drifted in sporadically. Callum didn't return. Neither did Diana. The absence didn't sting the way I thought it might. It left space for something else. I turned my attention to Brookhaven. Contractors replaced the worn carpet with smooth, warm-toned flooring. The faded walls were repainted in calming greens and blues. I signed off on hiring 8 new aides and 2 registered nurses. Each offered wages that would keep them here. The change was immediate lighter steps. Fewer unanswered call bells. Residents lingering in the lounge because someone was finally there to talk to them. Nina walked with me one afternoon, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. "It's starting to feel like a place worth staying in," she said. I felt it too. The stale heaviness was lifting. It was nearly a month before Callum appeared again. I saw him through the window first, no Diana beside him, no clipped business stride. He moved slower, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the entrance as though rehearsing what he'd say. When he reached my room, he didn't barge in. He knocked, waiting until I opened the door. "Mom," he said quietly. "Callum." He stepped inside, looking around at the small changes, fresh curtains. A rug under the bed. "Place looks different." "It is different." He nodded, hesitating. "I came to talk." His voice was measured, but there was something under it. Wariness. "Maybe." I gestured to the chair by the window. "Then sit. Say what you came to say." He sat, leaning forward slightly, and that's when I saw it. This wasn't just a son coming to mend things. This was a man with another motive entirely. Callum's hands were clasped, his eyes fixed on the floor. "It wasn't just me." He said, "Diana." She pushed for it, said you'd be better off here. But really, it was about freeing us up. We were planning a big expansion at the company. Less time worrying about you meant more time for work. I let the silence stretch. He looked up. It was selfish. "I see that now. I'm sorry." I studied him. And I want to do better. I've cleared my schedule for Tuesdays and Fridays. I'll come twice a week, no matter what. I'll help with events, set up chairs, run errands, whatever you need. Not just for you, but for the place. It wasn't a grand speech. That made it easier to believe. "I'll accept," I said slowly, "on 3 conditions. No phones or business calls while you're here. You engage with more than just me. You talk to residents, see their lives, and you treat every staff member with respect. They keep this place running. And they've earned it." He nodded without hesitation. "Deal." We walked together through the newly painted corridors. Residents greeted us by name. The hum of conversation replaced the empty quiet I'd first walked into. Nina waved from the nurse's station, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. Callum paused beside the activity room. Watching a group gathered around a table, "It feels alive in here," he said. "It is," I replied, and as we moved down the hall, I realized the sting of betrayal had dulled. Revenge had been satisfying, but the real victory was here in the brighter rooms, in the laughter from the lounge, in the knowledge that everyone here, not just me, finally mattered again.